Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. And today we are going to learn how to set up a React TypeScript development environment. And the way we are going to do this is by writing a number of Hello World code, which introduces the different tools and the different libraries that we are going to use for our development process. So let's begin by creating a empty directory, which is right here, and let me create a file which will explain the different steps that we're going to take in this video. So this is the first lesson of Hello World, right? And what we are going to do is first write hello HTML um, code, and then we're going to get into hello white, hello Tailwind CSS, hello Daisy UI, then hello ReactJS, or rather React. We are going to use TypeScript for this project. Then we are going to get into JSX and hello new JSX runtime transform. All right, so the first four parts here, these are the first four steps are focused on setting up a static web page development environment, and only after this we are going to introduce React and configure JSX and the new JSX runtime transformer. If you're not aware of what each of these things are, we will cover them as we are writing a hello world for each of these libraries, etc. All right, so let's start with hello HTML. So how do you set up a development environment for HTML? Well, first we do require index.html because it's a static web page, and index.html is a default HTML file that's served when you connect to a web server, right? And here is a very simple HTML file, nothing fancy. We'll just say hello HTML. Right, so this is the file in which, let's say, we are going to develop our static web page, and the next thing that we would want to do is to preview the HTML as we are writing the code for it. And one of the ways in which a lot of people do it is open it in the browser directly, but that is not recommended, because when you actually deploy your static web page in a web server, it behaves a little differently than if you were to open the file directly in the browser, right? Especially when it comes to fetching or downloading your CSS and the JavaScript files, right? So what we are going to do is instead use a live server. I have an extension installed in Visual Studio Code, this live server. You can do the same. And basically what that lets me do is it provides a go live button right here. And when I click this, it is going to open this web page in a web server. Now, the interesting thing about this, about using live server, is that as you make changes and save your pages, the changes are immediately reflected in your preview, right? So this basically is how you set up a simple HTML server. And now let's look at white. So basically, with something like live server, you will be able to develop static web pages. For small informational or business websites, that is good. But the moment you start writing a lot of JavaScript, it's going to get a little difficult organizing all your code. So that is because you would not be able to write modular JavaScript code. And in order to do that, we may want to use the ES modules feature, which allows us to modularize and write code in separate JavaScript files, which is better for maintenance and for you will be able to find what you're looking for very quickly. But browsers today do not natively understand ECMAScript modules or ES modules, and in order to do that, in order to write code in ES modules, we are going to require some kind of a development server which um, is going to convert our modular code into code that the browser actually understands, and that's where White comes in, right? So White is a npm package, and in order to use that, uh, let's create a npm package for our project itself and then include White as a dependency. So we init initialize the package. This creates a package.json, and then we're going to install White. Once we do this, we can now execute npx white dev, which essentially starts the White server. And well, right now with the code that we have written, it's functionally very similar to our live server. All right, and this also includes features wherein we can change the code and it immediately updates the preview as well, right? So that's basically our Hello White program, and let's look at Hello Tailwind CSS. So what exactly is this Tailwind CSS? Well, traditionally, when we develop web applications or websites, we write a lot of CSS, which is organized in a separate style sheet, in a separate .css file. And when we write them or when we debug them, we have to be extremely careful about what is a selector we are writing and what is the specificity of these selectors, etc. Right? So Tailwind CSS takes a different approach, wherein it encourages not to use CSS properties directly, but rather provides you with classes which have different classes for every CSS property. And instead of writing selectors and then writing these properties, we can use these classes directly on the HTML element that we'd like to apply the property to, right? So this ways, writing selectors and keeping specificity in our mind is something that is no longer necessary, and the code is much simpler. The only downside with Tailwind CSS is that you have a lot of verbose class names all over your HTML, which can be a little frustrating sometimes. But there is a workaround wherein you can use extensions to actually hide all Tailwind CSS classes and only show them when you're changing them, right? So right now I do not have any of those extensions installed because we don't need it for the initial setup. There's only going to be minimal CSS classes that we are going to be writing. So how do we configure Tailwind CSS? Now, basically we install Tailwind CSS and we also install the Tailwind CSS White plugin, and then and then basically ask White to install the Tailwind CSS plugin during its run and build time, right? So let's install the library npm I Tailwind CSS latest and Tailwind CSS/White. Right. So once this executes, we have installed the necessary dependencies for Tailwind CSS. Now let's create a white.config.ts file, the configuration file for White. And so basically what we can do is we can use the define config function provided by White. Okay, this can be used to override any configurations, right? So as plugins, we'll use the Tailwind CSS plugins. So this is how we include the Tailwind CSS plugin in White dev. So now, while we have the plugin available, so if we say npx White dev, and let's first add the some of the class names provided by Tailwind CSS, right? So let's say we add text-3xl. You wouldn't see this applied because we have to still create a CSS file wherein we import Tailwind CSS, right? So let's do that next. We're going to create a src slash styles.css file wherein we are going to import Tailwind CSS. Do not forget to include this semicolon at the end. I know some of us may not prefer putting that in JavaScript, but it is necessary for CSS, especially for your import and plugin syntax, right? So once we do this, let's include this in our HTML. Right? And okay, so styles styles.css, right? And now you can see this has applied. So you can make the text small, you can make the text large, right? You can give it a color. All right. Or you can make it bold, right? You can do a whole bunch of stuff. So this is basically how you install and configure Tailwind CSS. All right. So let me just change the text to hello Tailwind CSS. All right. Now let's look at our backlog. We are done with this. Another library that we may want to use is the Daisy UI library. So what this is it basically is built on top of Tailwind CSS, and it provides us with a few ready-made components that we can use. And it also includes features wherein we can create themes, or we have a choice of quite a number of themes that that Daisy UI itself provides, and we can readily use it and allow our users to select the themes that they like, right? So again, installing Daisy UI is as simple as installing Tailwind CSS. The process is pretty similar. So all we have to do is install Daisy UI latest and then include this in the style CSS. So it's a plugin for Tailwind CSS. So we include Daisy UI right here, and then it should work all right. So notice that the background color has changed because it is using the default theme of Daisy UI, which is basically setting the page background, right? And so an example of Daisy UI is again similar to Tailwind CSS. This provides us with a number of classes that allows us to create components, right? So we can create a button in this fashion, right? So there's a large button. If you want a small button, BTN and BTN SM makes it a small button. All right. So we have Tailwind CSS, we have Daisy UI configured. So basically what we have done until this point is configured a project for static web development, right? So everything that we have done can be used to build static websites. The only thing that you may want to know at this point is if you want to build your static web page, type npx white build, and it's going to create a dist folder in your projects, which is going to have all your static files. So this is where it converts all of your CSS, all of your JavaScript into code that that the browser can understand. All right. Now, let's look at these other things. Let's look at the next part, which is Hello React TypeScript. So basically, now we are going to get React to work. Now, what React is it's a very simple library that allows us to create single-page applications. And the beauty of React is that it does not provide you with a lot of features. It provides a minimal set of features that is necessary to build single page applications. It's very, very minimal. And it relies on native JavaScript capabilities for us to do a lot of stuff in single page applications. So it's not very opinionated, right? So if you want to implement any kind of patterns, if you want to solve a certain problem, then relies on your knowledge and understanding of JavaScript to implement it, right? So that's what React is. And since we are building a single page application, the way single page applications work is that you only have one HTML page which loads all the different views of your application. And the way this happens is it uses JavaScript to work with user interactions and make sure that the views change using by manipulating the native DOM. So everything that happens within one HTML page. And in order to bootstrap this, in order to load it properly, what we are going to need is a placeholder element where your application is loaded. So the way I'm doing this is to create a div tag root, and I'll just say loading here. And when React application starts correctly, what it'll do is it's going to replace all the contents of this div tag with the DOM for our application, right? So another thing that we will require is the code, which basically loads our React application. So here I'm creating an index.tsx. Now you may ask, what exactly is this extension tsx, right? So typically we write JSX code in React. So instead of .js, which is JavaScript files, we add the extension .jsx. And since we are using TypeScript, we are using the tsx extension. And we will cover what exactly is JSX in the next step. But at this point, it will suffice to understand that it's basically a superset of TypeScript file or JavaScript file, right? So it's plain JavaScript or plain TypeScript at this point. All right. So let's create this file. And then here we are going to grab hold of this element. Okay. And we are going to create a root and render the React application right there. So the way to do that is, okay, first let's install the React library, which provides us with all the necessary bootstrapping functions. So npm install react DOM, and React DOM requires the TypeScript types to be present. So we are installing that package as well. And then create root, right? Document dot get element by ID root. Okay, notice there's an error here because it is also expecting, so this value can be null, but create root does not accept null values. So we'll use a TypeScript exclamation operator to ensure that this value is never null. And then we are going to render our React application. So this React application is basically, it creates a virtual DOM, which then during runtime manipulates our actual DOM and the virtual DOM, and make sure that the actual DOM mirrors the virtual DOM, right? So we can create virtual DOM components here. And the way to do that is use create element function. And then let's say we'd like to create a h1 tag, which has hello ReactJS, right? So the second argument here is if you'd like to give any attributes to the h1 tag, that is where we use the second argument. Since we are not modifying any of the attributes, we'll just pass null here, right? And then the moment we do this and say npx white build, npx white dev to start the dev server, and then reload the page, you can see hello React is coming. And if I click this several times, you may notice that it shows loading for an instant before changing that to hello React, as React finds the element and then replaces and then renders the React's elements right there. All right. So this is basically our hello React program. Now, basically, if you were to show this hello world program to somebody who knows React, he would not agree that this is your hello React application, because we have not yet used JSX, and JSX is such a critical component in the React library that you cannot work without it. I mean, imagine what would happen if you start writing create element for every tag in your application. So let's create a very simple ordered list with 2 items in it. Okay, so this is how it's going to look. Um, create element unordered list null, and then it has 2 items, which are create element list item, which is item 1, and list item for item 2. Okay, now it renders this here, looks fine, but now imagine that every element, every HTML element that you're going to include in your application has a create element associated with it. So your code is going to be pretty verbose, and it's going to be very confusing. It's going to be difficult for you to just glance at the code and understand what's really happening there, what's the structure, etc. So the best way to solve this problem is to actually replace this with HTML code. Now, what React does is, instead of using HTML as string literals, for instance, instead of using code uh, of something like this, we can basically remove these codes and it works. All right. Of course, right now it did not work because we need to import React here, and then it works. Okay. Because what white does is it's going to convert this code. It's going to find all of the JSX that we use in our code and convert this into the equivalent create element code. It's going to convert it into this code, right? So this is how it's going to work. And basically what we do is, we write JSX and allow libraries like white to transpile the code into what a browser can understand. All right. So now that we have this basic JSX written, let's also look at, what is this new JSX runtime transformer? Okay. So notice that when we wrote our JSX, it did not run until we included this React, right? So if we were to not include this, and in fact, if we were to write this code, it doesn't work. And if you look at the console, it says that React is not defined because the code was transpiled into react.createElement, ULLI, etc. Right? So in order to solve this, React 17 onwards, the developers have included a new JSX runtime, which provides a global function, the JSX function, that can be imported once and called from anywhere in your code. So that way you don't require imports in every file that you're going to use JSX with. And the way to actually use the new JSX transformer is to use the white React plugin. And to do that, let's install white.js plugin React. All right. And I'm resuming my development server. And now we have to include white React in the white configuration in the plugins. Okay, and the moment I do this, notice that it started working again without requiring any kind of import to React. All right, so the way this works is, instead of converting your code to react.createElement calls, as I showed you previously, it's going to use a function like import JSX from React JSX runtime, right? It's going to convert it into this. JSX UL, which has children, which has JSX li, which has children as item 1. Okay, so this has to be in JSON object of its own. And similarly, item 2. All right. So instead of using react.createElement, it uses the JSX function call. Okay. So, but however, the good thing is we don't have to import this anymore. Okay, when we write this code, we have to, but when you write the actual JSX code, you don't have to, because it'll be globally imported. All right. So this is basically the, we are almost at the end of this video, but let's, before we go away, there are a couple of tips for all of you. So the first one is basically to the use of a React component called strict mode, right? So the entire React.js application must be wrapped inside something called strict mode. So there's a component, and components can be used as React as basically HTML code, right? But it's not an HTML component. It's a component that is defined in React, and React does the necessary operations to interpret this code. All right. And so what does a strict mode do? It only works in development. So it does not work in production. So what strict mode does is, at the time of development, if you are using any deprecated features of React.js, or there is something that seems to be working initially but may not work when you build your project, etc. Right? So strict mode identifies all of those issues in the React code that you're writing, and it brings that to your notice. So it will be a warning, an alert, etc. That you have to look into. Right. So without the strict mode, you may use a feature and you may never know about why some portion of your code is not working in production, for instance. Okay. Or something that's deprecated may work today but may stop working next week. So that's the reason you may want to include strict mode. All right. Now the other thing that you may want to be aware of is basically in the process of using Tailwind CSS and the Daisy UI classes, we no longer can use the class attribute like this. And the reason for this is because when your JSX is converted into native JavaScript, and when we have the different attributes for the tags, we cannot create an object with class as the key. A JSON with class as a key in JavaScript. The reason is class is a predefined keyword in JavaScript. It's used for creating classes, right? And then you can instantiate objects from it. So that is the reason you're not allowed to use class. Instead, you can use something called as class name. All right. It behaves identical to the class attribute in HTML. It's only that it's called something else here. Right. So, for instance, let's give this a color, text red 300. This makes my list red, and we can make each of these items a button. For instance, class name btn sm. All right. So these are the Daisy UI classes, and this is our Tailwind CSS class, right? If you would like to learn more about some of these things that we have used, it's best to read the documentation. For instance, I assume you already know HTML and JavaScript. For white.dev is a website. You can go to guide, you can go to config and learn how to use white. For Tailwind CSS is something that you would use a lot at the time of development, because you need to understand what the different class names are and what they actually do. For instance, flexbox for layouts, all of these classes, everything is given here. Display flex, for instance. So there is a flex class name which applies the display flex property. Then you have the flex direction. like flex row and flex call. Then you have the flex row and flex call to have direction as your row or column, and then the flex one flex hyphen number for configuring um, stretchable items, etc. So if there's something that you would want to look up, there are certain classes which may exist, which may not exist. So if you want to make sure you're using the class name which exists, then there's something that you may want to have it open when you're developing. Another thing that you may want to do is to install this extension, which is the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension, which provides you with suggestions. Like if I type, for example, BG base 300, right? So you can see that this is giving me suggestions, and that is coming from this extension, Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. All right. And similarly for Daisy UI, go to daisyui.com, go to components, and this is where you have a list of all components. You can also get the components here, so you can easily navigate from one component to another very quickly when you open it in the side nav. All right. So button, for instance, is given here, and all the necessary all the classes that you can use here is provided here. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video. Now what you must do is practice the same thing, practice setting up this environment time and again. Do it 4 times, 5 times, 10 times, as many times as necessary, so that you can comfortably and consistently set up an environment by yourself. Right? Only when you are able to do that, you can be certain you will have the confidence that you can work with any of these technologies. The idea here is that you don't have any kind of hesitation in using this technology, or you feel confident that there is no magic happening under the hood, and you should be comfortable to basically pop the hood and make any changes necessary. So all the best, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you.